Hey, Jordan.
How's it going, Brooke?
It's going all right. How are you doing?
Doing well. Enjoying the last few days of nice weather here in Ohio before it gets very cold.
Okay, you're lucky because winter has officially hit in Utah. Like already, we've had a couple of snowstorms. We've got snow out there right now. It's been like dark and dreary, but yeah, live it up because winter's
Yeah.
coming.
I was just in the Dominican Republic speaking at the Caribbean Developers Conference, and I came home to like a foot of leaves covering my backyard. So that's
Oh,
what I have to
nice.
look forward to. So
Yeah, annoying to rake up, but isn't that like such a cool, I don't know, I love that feeling of fall. I think it's fun.
yeah, it's like the best, like the if for people who don't understand the Midwest, like living in the Midwest, like the fall is the best time of the year. It's like beautiful. It's like, yeah, it's not too hot, not too cold. It's generally like it's the best. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. I believe that. I lived in Quebec for a little while, and it was kind of the same thing, just being on that East Coast, and fall was just bright, vibrant colors and so beautiful. But anyway, so thank you for being here with me. You're actually one of my first guests on this series, but really, like, the whole idea with this Angular Learning Journey series is where we're going to talk about your experiences learning Angular. So that's, I mean, yes, your story getting into Angular, but what you struggled with, maybe what you still struggle with, what have been your successes, and everything along those lines. We just want to dive into Jordan's learning path with Angular.
Sounds scary, but let's do it.
I doubt that. I doubt that. But um, we kind of talked about it already. Before we really get into it, I just think it's fun to get to know our guests a little bit more, get to know a little bit about you. And as of recording today, we've just had Halloween. We're kind of like in that in between period, between holidays, but we've got Christmas coming up. And you mentioned the Midwest. So I don't know if the Midwest is like Utah, but we are like already all about Christmas. Everything everywhere is all Christmas. So it just got me thinking though, like, what are some holiday traditions that you like to do around this time of year?
It's a good question. Um, I would say my wife and my kids are much more into Christmas than I am. Not that I'm not into Christmas. I would say actually for me, Thanksgiving is like my most favorite holiday. So for me, I look forward to that, which is like in a couple weeks, or yeah, like a couple weeks.
Yeah.
Um, so for me, like I grew up in a house where like we loved football, so we would watch football. So like the idea of like eating really good food and just watching football, and like that's the entire agenda, and just be thankful for like the
Right.
amazing life that we have. Like for me, like that's like all the things I'm cool with. So that for
Yeah.
me, like that's my favorite. I would say like holiday, like tradition, I guess. But beyond that, just like obviously, um, my wife and my kids really enjoy it. So you know take like buying, I would rather buy gifts than like receive gifts. So like I like
Yeah.
going, I'm terrible at buying gifts. I'll clarify that. I never know what's a good gift to buy, but I enjoy like giving gifts and things like that. So like I like shopping for our kids and that kind of thing. And then we generally like on Christmas Eve we like to go to church, and then we then like come home and open presents on Christmas morning. So a lot
Nice.
of just like normal, like quote unquote Midwestern, like Christmas traditions. But for the most part, yeah, it's Thanksgiving is the one for me that resonates the most.
Nice. I like that. Just the simple at home with family and football.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think Christmas has become very commercialized, and like
Mhm.
it's like it's almost like for me, like it's kind of defeats the purpose of Christmas to begin with for me personally. So that I find that frustrating a little bit. So that's
Yeah.
where I like Chris or Thanksgiving, just because it's like it's very simple, like you said. It's just I'm just thankful. Like we don't have a perfect life, it doesn't mean I don't
Right.
work hard for things, but I'm still very thankful. So
Yeah. Yeah. One thing my brother has started doing for Christmas was like instead of, I think they have like a certain spending limit so
mm,
that, the kids are still getting some gifts, but what they really focus on now is more of like giving experiences. So mom and dad will take this child and they'll go to the gymnastics meet because she's really into gymnastics, or the other one they'll, so they take them around and they do things, and they really like that. And the kids now, it's I think their favorite part of Christmas. It's not the actual toys and things. It's, oh my gosh, we get to go do something with mom and dad. So I thought that was
Yeah,
a good idea.
I totally agree. I feel like looking back on my childhood, like I don't know if I could tell you like one present I received, but I could tell you the really cool experiences I had, like vacations or just like
Yeah.
things, I did with my mom or my dad or brothers and sisters. So I think that definitely like experiences are a great place to invest time, and it's something as a parent, like those are things that I think quite a lot about. Is like I hate spending money, but like I've recently been talking with my wife, like I need to, our kids grow up so fast, so it's like I want to make sure I'm taking time and money to, do the things that are going to be things they remember the rest of their lives.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. All right. So you are currently the developer experience engineer at Cypress, and you're also a popular speaker. Like you said, you just got back from a conference there in the Caribbean, right?
Yeah, it was rough.
Yeah, I'm sure. Out on the beach in the sand. But then you're also, I have to give you a big congratulations because you're also a newly minted GDE in Angular. So congratulations for
Thanks.
that.
Likewise.
Thank you. Yeah, I know. We kind of got it like
Pretty close.
like maybe a
Couple of
month
weeks.
apart was all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
something like that.
It's a big accomplishment though. So yeah, like
It is.
props to you. But on top of all that though, you're actually the co-founder of a nonprofit organization called Dream On Global. And if I can simplify it down a little bit, it's basically where you go around to places in Central and South America, and you're helping mostly young adults and teenagers to know how to, like, what they need to do and what they can do to find happiness and success and fulfillment in life, right?
Yeah, for sure. And in kind of the same spirit of Christmas, like one of the things that we do is um a lot of the kids and places that we have, like we have facilities in multiple basically cities throughout the Central America. And one of the facilities that we have, or at least several of the facilities we have, we actually send Christmas gifts because a lot of the kids won't get any presents.
Wow.
And so it's something that we like to like have our kids. We'll go out and shop for presents and send them down, or we'll send money,
Cool.
and then those people, our people who run our facilities will, get presents for the kids. So that's just like little things like that I think that as developers, it's very easy to get heads down and focused on
Yeah.
like the problems that we face all day long, and it's very easy to lose track of that there are other people with bigger issues than us. Even
Yeah.
again, it doesn't invalidate our own problems or the things we face, but I think that any time, in the spirit of really the nature of this video series is just the more we can give back to people, really it I find a lot of joy in doing that. So definitely, yeah, the nonprofit is very centered around just helping people find purpose in life. No one wants to go through life and have the sense of like just wandering, like you don't know what
Right.
you're doing. Why are you doing it? And life is very finite. So we should, enjoy the days that we have. So I think
Yeah.
that's important and something that we put an effort on.
Yeah. It's one reason I love doing the meetup too, because we're connecting people. And there's
Totally.
always someone in need of something, and I just love being able to connect people and help them find, like you said, find their place. So, but at the end, I'd love to get information on how anybody could possibly contribute to that Christmas
Oh,
donation. I
wow.
think
That'd be
that'd be
great.
cool. Yeah. So let's make sure we get the link for that.
Absolutely.
But also on top of that, I've heard, and you'll have to explain this a little bit more, but you also help teach, and it sounded like particularly mothers, but maybe not just exclusively them, how to program. So when you go down to these countries, you're offering training and some kind of teaching opportunities where they're learning skills that they can then turn around and use to help sustain themselves, right?
Yeah. So we do a lot of things for mothers, primarily. We actually, but in terms of like programming, the area that I specifically focus on is younger, like teenagers and young adults, and the reason being is that for example, Honduras, one of our main countries, we have a pretty big I guess like facility and a lot of efforts going on there. Like it's like 70, 85, like 70 to 80% of the households are single moms. And so what happens is the moms go out and work all day because they have to like you know, they have to provide
Right.
for their
Yeah.
family. And so kids, like literally like newborns, all their kids are just wandering the streets. And so what we identified is that then the gangs would come in and they would basically take these kids and give them a better life essentially, but they
Right.
basically, it's kind of like, I'll give you a better life, but for now, but then you're going to do
At a
things
cost.
maybe yeah, exactly, it's going to cost you something. And so what we did is basically we created these facilities that are a safe place that they can go.
Cool.
They're open from like 8 a.m. to 10 at night. We feed them a meal
Wow.
every single day. And one of my long-term goals is to basically put computer labs in there. And we actually just are in the process of building a second story on the building that we feed our kids on now. But the goal would be is that we could take, for example, that building and buildings throughout all of our feeding programs, and we could put computer labs, maybe it be
Cool.
one computer or 100 computers, whatever that may be. And then on a daily basis, a weekly basis, however that looks like, we could do remote trainings and that kind of thing. I do meet with several people pretty regularly, just like we're building things for the efforts we're doing promotion, teaching them how to do website development, using Angular, a lot of things like that. So I do one-on-one things, but I want to eventually scale it to grow it so it can be more of like almost like a school where they can learn how to write code and that kind of thing. Because, in most of the countries we've been to, $2, $3, $4, $500 US dollars a month is basically like the average wage. And like most programmers, we make more than that in a week, and so we could very easily they could easily get a job for, I don't know, let's say $2,000 to be 4 times what the average person in their community makes. But it would be like a great blessing for their family and their community. So I think there's a lot of benefits, and they can live right there. They don't have to move. Like this, the advantage of being in a remote first field, I think is really beneficial. So
totally. Yeah. Well, again, let's make sure we get the link at the bottom, because I think any opportunities to contribute to that, whether it's becoming a mentor, maybe eventually when you get the school set up, that'd be really cool.
Absolutely.
Okay, so then in that spirit, then in that nature, you're talking about providing education and training for Angular for other people. So clearly you have at least somewhat of a bug for education here.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to talk about. So I'm curious, like before we get into some of the nitty-gritty on your exact learning journey, but let's just start with the beginning of how did you get into Angular specifically? So you'd already been programming, I'm sure, but how did you get into Angular? How did you find it? That kind of thing.
Yeah, so I was doing a lot of like before starting Angular, I was doing a lot of freelance, like just jQuery, WordPress, just like a lot of like local small business, like websites for agencies and things like that. And then I, at the time, was working another job, and I was kind of like doing this on the side. And I was kind of like, I really like this programming thing. I want to do it full time. And so I ended up taking this job at a local insurance company. And at that job, we were basically tasked with moving from like a legacy, this really old IBM technology into a more, like modern technological like stack. And so we had looked into, at the time, this was like 6 years ago. So at the time, Angular 2 was like just coming out.
Okay.
React was pretty kind of new, but still like had a lot of promise. And so we looked into both of those, and we ended up deciding on Angular, and mostly because we were an insurance company. We were heavily kind of coupled to forms, and like basically everything we did was collecting data via forms for our customers so that they could, create an insurance policy.
Sure.
And so for us, there was a big draw to because Angular has forms just like native built into it.
Right.
And I think it's one of the main benefits that I don't think enough credit is given to the Angular as an ecosystem, because a lot of other frameworks, you got to pick your own framing forms framework and stuff like that. So for us, like that's kind of how I got into it. And
Okay.
I didn't know where to start. I was like, okay, it looks kind of cool. Like it was much easier to bind. I remember how easy it was to like bind properties from like the class into the template. Like that seemed much easier than doing like jQuery or something like that. And I'm like,
Right.
okay, I like this. But I remember feeling very overwhelmed. It felt a little complex, and it felt like there was a very, very opinionated way I was supposed to go about
Right.
creating applications. But I didn't really know. And at the time, I mean, my most of my experience had came in like HTML and CSS and a little
Okay.
PHP, but I wouldn't have called myself like an engineer or programmer. And so even just like basic JavaScript things were very difficult for me to do. And like what is a class versus a method? Like all those things were like things we just assume everyone knows, but they're
Yeah.
not obvious, and it's hard to kind of get this mental model of them. And so yeah, like that's kind of where it started.
Okay.
And up until recently, I've pretty much worked in Angular every single day since
Okay.
then. So.
A little similar to me, just in that I definitely didn't have like a firm foundation in JavaScript before I just dove into Angular. And so many people would say, well, just go learn Angular, the other stuff will come
Mm,
naturally. And I believe that to an extent, but I do also think that's a bit hurtful as well. I think you really should balance it out and really, make sure you're studying the basics and the JavaScript while you're learning the Angular. But
totally.
so your background though, you didn't go to college, you didn't get like a computer science degree. So I think that could also potentially have contributed to that learning curve. Or would you disagree with that? Do you think that it would have been the same for you had you had that degree?
It probably would have been much easier because I didn't understand the fundamental things of programming, like
Hmm.
classes and functions and like just all the like basic things. I understood like what a string was, but just like I don't know, beyond just like very, very fundamental, trivial parts of like core programming, I didn't really understand what they were, and not necessarily like what they were, but the consequences of like, why you don't want to have like why we do dependency injection versus like newing up everything or like
Right.
repeating ourselves or just like all the things that are pretty obvious. The more like if you do programming for more than like a couple days, you're like, yeah, that was painful. I'm not going to do that again, right? And so I would say from a programming standpoint, it was definitely a a more of a learning curve because I didn't have that foundation. But I will say one of the things that at the time I leaned on, and really I still lean on today, is that I take the experiences I learned from my career outside of programming, and I really lean on those
Hmm.
as a programmer. And I was formerly worked at a church. I was basically like a young adult and small group pastor with my wife, and so I worked with people, and so uh, I recognized very early that a lot of programmers, not everyone, but a lot of them don't like working with people, or it's not
Right.
something they are naturally good at. And so I recognized that I could take something that was a strength for me and use it in in this new career. And I really leaned on that, and I really do still to like even to this day, even though I consider myself a fairly experienced engineer. And I think that that's the important thing I would say for people when they're learning is that, don't despise like little, like small beginnings, like start where you are today, because we've all started somewhere. And also just like, don't, don't, don't look at like the experience you have. Maybe you're like, you work at Chipotle or something, like you're, I mean, it doesn't matter
Yeah.
like what you do. It's like, take the experiences that you have, good or bad, and learn from them and try to apply those to, the next career, whether it's programming or something else.
Yeah. And dive into that for me, because you said that you used your social skills. So and yet you acknowledge that a lot of developers like to be a little bit more introverted or are private. So then how are you using that? If other people were being a little more, to themselves, secluded, like how did you use your social skills to benefit you? Were you asking people to pair program with you, or what were you doing that made that an advantage?
Yeah. So the way I was able to use my social skills is, I would say that for the most part, once you learn how to program, for the most part, like writing code is probably the most simplest thing we do as an engineer. At least for me, like I generally don't find the code I write to be that difficult, but I would say the process of writing software is the really difficult thing. Like finding out what are the requirements. Are those the real requirements, or are those just what we like have written down? Working with other teams, like all those types of things that are really really valuable for you as an engineer, that sometimes I don't think we put enough emphasis on. So I would say like I leaned upon, I asked a lot of questions, like when we were in meetings, like doing brainstorming on how we are going to solve certain problems. I would ask a lot of questions to the point like it was probably annoying to people, but I've always been the kid, even as a little kid, my parents would say that you just ask so many questions. And so I think like asking questions, you know, working cross-functionally between other teams, other departments, those types of skills, or the things that I really leaned upon in that sense. And then the other thing that I would say is, I've always been like pretty secure in myself, and I'm not afraid of failing. Like I think we all want to succeed, but like I have always been someone who has been more than willing to basically admit I don't know something and say, hey, can I pair with you? Like, can you teach me something? So I've always been able to identify someone or multiple people on my team or where I'm working that I could learn things from. And so I'd ask, hey, will you mentor me? Will you teach me what you know? And maybe, what can I do to take something off of your plate that maybe you don't want to do that you could teach me along the way? So I think that sometimes we don't like to admit we don't know something. It's like this prideful thing or something like that. But for me, I would say I took my security upon like who I am and because like I know that I'm not, even to this day, I'm not going to ever be the smartest person in the room. If I'm in a room with a bunch of engineers, like there's some really smart people out there,
Right.
but I know that I'm different than them because I have different experiences. So I can lean upon my experiences, bring those to the table, and use that to maybe ask a different type of question than maybe that the other people in the room would think about. And so
Yeah.
that's where I would just say, as you're learning, know who you are, know the things you're good at, know the things you're not good at, and don't be afraid of those things. And don't be afraid to ask for help and ask questions, because that's what makes the idea of diversity, the idea of taking different experiences, whether you're different gender, different races, no matter what that experience looks like, taking the background that you have, the experiences you have, and bringing those to the table, because those different experiences maybe ask a different type of question that could be maybe critical to the success of the thing you're building.
Yeah. I'll admit that was one of my earliest, I think, mistakes as a new developer, was not asking enough questions. I felt very self-conscious about, oh my gosh, if they see me asking that question, they're going to think that I don't deserve to be here, that I've somehow like tricked them into getting me this job, and they're going to be like, we made a mistake, sorry, you got to go, like that those literally
Sure.
are like feelings I've gone through, and I just would get so anxious, and so I would kind of sit there silently suffering, and learned the hard way, everybody, the hard way, that that's not the way to do it. And I like what you said though, because you were talking about going across teams and not just relying on people on your immediate team, but finding ways, and especially how you said that, can I help take something off your plate? Can I help you do something so that you're not just giving me time and it's taking time away from your work, but let's do something that we can be productive together that's
Mm.
also helping you out. That I think is really smart. So
Yeah, and I always tell people like, when they'll ask like, okay, when I mentor them, like I'll mentor them and I'll say, hey, let's work on something. But I'll say, hey, can we work on this project that I'd like to do by myself, but I don't have the full capacity to focus on. But maybe you could help me while I help you, right?
yeah,
Or in the same sense, I always tell people that if you want to get, like, I get asked, like, how do I get into programming? Because they know I'm self-taught. And I always tell people, like, well, one, you have to like be devoted to learning it. And it's really hard. It's not that it's impossible. It's just that you have to be devoted and
right.
want to do it. But the other thing, it's like, if you went to a local business or something that had programmers and say, hey, can I come a day a week, a couple hours, whatever, and I'll just do anything because I just want to be around your people. Like, what company would be like, nah, that's okay, we don't want free help,
Yeah,
like, you know what
right.
I mean? Like, but the hardest job in programming is to get your first job and get the experience you need so that you can start to learn
Yeah,
on the job. And so I think that, you know, being willing to put yourself out there and to get rejected or say I don't know all these things, that's the difficult part for us. And I think part of it is we deal with, like, even as a programmer who's, an engineer whose experience is like, we deal with like really complicated problems all day long. So
hmm
it's like, mentally, like, how do you go from like, I'm the, like, you feel like the smartest person in the world when you solve it, but then you feel like the dumbest person in the world like right before you solve it.
yep,
So it's like you deal with this wide range of emotions. And so um I think it's important to understand who you are, understand what your skills are, and not be afraid to fail.
yeah, yeah. Boy, there's a lot to unpack there. That was a lot of good stuff. But take me back though, because you mentioned your initial, you're self-taught, and you had to, it sounds like with your team, you kind of had to figure out Angular together or very much individually. I'm not sure, but how did that go? Like what did you find most difficult as you first set out to learn Angular? What were those initial barriers, and what was that experience like just in general as you started on that journey?
Sure. So for me, one of the most difficult things there I I I ran into was just, I mentioned, like, I didn't have the fundamental programming background. So I actually used I remember going through a couple courses on, I think it was called Tree Frog, basically like kind of like a Pluralsight or something like that. But basically like taught me JavaScript 101. And it was things like I knew, but things that I didn't really know. Like I
Okay.
didn't understand the fullness of
Right.
what it was doing or why. Um, and so that really, really helped me. And then from there, um, that helped give me like, okay, I understand, okay, Angular uses classes and these other things inside of them are properties and the other things are methods. Like even just like the basic things like that, that was helpful to know, like a little bit kind of how everything worked.
Right.
And then at that point, I'm like, okay, I kind of understand the basics, but then we were building forms and like not just like first name, like email, password. It's like if you're from this state and you have like, if you're taller than 6 foot and have purple hair, like you have like a certain discount. Like it's like crazy, like crazy
Conditionals and
algorithms that have
yeah.
all these conditions, and you had to account for all these scenarios. And so I didn't really so forms became like the thing I worked in every day, and the things that were really, really difficult. And the problem I ran into is most of the the examples, documentation were very simple, like, examples. And I know a lot of people, get on the like reactive forms versus template forms, like argument, but like even all the arguments are like very trivial examples. It's like, yeah, like you can NGF the, this form field or something in template forms, or you can do it like in the class or something with reactive forms. But it was still like those were like very trivial examples. Like, how do you do that at a very complex scale? And so for me at the time, these were kind of some of the friction. So like as we begin to build our applications out, I remember we just kept refactoring them, and we kind of never really got really never felt like we had a really good architecture or pattern in place. And for honestly, for myself and for our team, one of the best investments we ever did was go to NG-Conf, believe it or not. I didn't know a single person in the Angular community. This was 2019.
Okay.
And basically I was like, I want to solve this problem. I want to figure out, how do you do forms right? And I remember just DMing people that were speaking and saying, hey, can you meet with me? I have this question. These are the problems I have to solve. And I ended up doing that with who's now a really good friend of mine, Wes Grimes, another GD. And he was like, yeah, he worked for an insurance company at the time and build forms. And so he had the same problems. And basically I was able to use NGRX to solve a lot of the kind of state problems we were having in our application.
Okay.
But even at that, I'm like, okay, but how, like NGRX is really complicated. Like, how do I do that? Right. And he actually sat down with me and said, okay, this is how you do it. Like, this is the way you do NGRX. And just a couple turns, like I would be like, hey, can you give me like an hour of your time, half hour, just to show me like what are these actions things? Explain to me what good action hygiene is. Explain to me how to use reducers, selectors, like just all the basic things. I wanted to hear it from someone that I knew what they were talking about. And then from there, I would say, hey, he had open source projects he was working on, and say, hey, I'll commit to spending time on your project if you explain to me how to use this thing. So
wow,
that's kind of the way I leveraged other people, by like trying to provide value to them without just like asking for something in return.
right.
But yeah, NG-Conf was surprisingly very very crucial in my path to kind of becoming where I am today. And it was very surreal going there this last or couple of months ago, and I was one of the speakers, and that was the last, like it was like the last one was 2019, and then the next one I'm speaking at. So it was very surreal kind of experience for me.
Coming full circle. So I was going to ask though, because one of the questions I am always curious about is, what kind of learning circles do you have, or do you work with mentors? And it sounds like a lot of what you did then was reach out to individuals and just ask them. So then here's a question for you, because you've already identified that's a skill of yours, to be able to reach out to people. You're not really shy or afraid to ask for help like that, but other people are. And for them, I know that they might be listening to this and they're kind of like, there's no way I could never do that. I can't even go that way. So what would you suggest for people who are more shy and who are more introverted?
Sure. So I would say most engineers I've talked to learn by doing something, like building something. That's what makes us engineers, and what makes us developers. So, but some people like learn better via like listening to something. Some like to talk it out. Some like to watch something. So I would like say, if you can identify the way you like to learn, that's a good place to start. But I mean, the internet is like infinite supply of learning. Like there's unlimited amounts of things you can learn about Angular, or really anything programming. And so I would say, if you have a problem you're running into, it's very unlikely it's the first time anyone, like you're the first person that's ever had this problem. So you would be surprised just Googling like the error you get or the problem you're trying to solve, like how many resources are already available for those things. And for those people that it's a little less intimidating to just like read a blog article or watch a YouTube video or, pay for a tutorial or a free tutorial. Those types of things are also super valuable if you don't, like you said, feel comfortable reaching out on a one-on-one basis. But I would just say, like, at the end of the day, the thing that's going to make you successful or not is your basically love to learn, because this is a career that you have to learn constantly. And so if you're someone who hates learning new things, it's not something I would recommend, like, going into this field. But I would just say it doesn't necessarily matter how you learn or the way you learn or what you learn. It's just that devote yourself to learning something every single day, and you'll look back and you won't feel it necessarily, in the moment, and there will be aha moments along the way. But for the most part, you won't really notice the growth until you look back and you're like, oh yeah, like this is code I wrote a year ago, and wow, like I've grown quite a bit, right?
Yeah.
What
Boy,
was I
that's
thinking, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got a few questions left for you. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but I think I would be remiss if I didn't ask a little bit about testing, since you are the Cypress guru here. So I know that's not Angular specifically, but it is an important part of being an Angular developer, is testing. So is there anything you could say, speaking directly to learning how to test as an Angular developer and that learning journey?
Sure, that's a great question. I would say, for me, the team I was working on, we didn't use any automated testing. We had manual QA teams, and basically like one QA person, two developers. So if I was working on a project, I had a dedicated QA person. So like I wasn't worried about breaking things. Like, we were just working in development. I would push changes, they would test it, tell me if it works, doesn't work, and I would fix it. Like, we just kept doing this until the backlog got smaller. We didn't have sprints. So
Oh, wow.
our process of like building software was very different than most people.
Okay.
But I would say it wasn't until I learned how to write automated testing that I really felt like I became a much better programmer. And this is one of the reasons why I'm passionate about writing tests, is because testing is a really good way to sort of gauge your code quality, I feel like, because if you have a bunch of code that's difficult to test, it's probably a smell that there's a better way to write your code.
Right.
And so once you recognize that, then it's a good place to start, like, oh, I should refactor this, I should rewrite this, how else could I solve this problem? And then, really, as you begin to write unit tests for things in your applications, like those are there to help you as a developer, help you to grow, help you to make sure, and really to build confidence in yourself. And so as just a rule of thumb for Angular developers, I tell people to unit test anything that's like a pure function. So if you're using like NGRX, or like, you have reducers and selectors and, effects, things like that, anything that's not a component, you should probably like have at least some type of test, just so you feel confident in it. And not necessarily that you feel confident today, but that you feel confident like 6 months from now, or when someone else touches that file, or maybe add something else or remove something, you want that, be confident that it's going to stay the same. And then with the adoption of if you bring Cypress into the fold, if you add Cypress to do like end-to-end testing, so the idea of testing your applications the way users actually going to use them, that's really valuable too, because it's a good way to catch, if you're one of those people, like you mentioned, that don't like to admit like you made mistakes or things like that, like testing is your best friend, because it will catch things before you have to find out that it's broken in production or something like that. And then, excuse me, one of the most recent things we came out with at Cypress is component testing. And I think this is a game changer for Angular developers, because you can test your components in a really easy way, and it provides a much better value. And I find it'll make testing way more enjoyable for developers. But those are kind of my general suggestions. It's just commit to writing it, even if your team doesn't place a value on it. I think it will make you better as a developer, just by trying to like just make it a goal. Like, hey, if I'm committing code, I have a test, matching test for those things. So
Yeah. It's interesting because when I was still learning, this was back when I was working at NG-Conf, and I was with Joe Eames, and he would often talk about his career and the point at which he really, like, his career really took off, and he attributes it exactly to when he started to learn how to test,
mhm.
and says often that when he committed to really becoming a good tester, that was when he started to give talks and presentations. At that point, companies were taking notice of him, and things just really took off for him. So I've always tried to keep that in mind. And I know that Shai Resnick has kind of made mention of that as well, that was, and even Mishko Hevery,
Mhm.
all of these guys have said, when I learned testing, that was when my understanding of Angular and programming really deepened, and their careers just kind of launched at that point. So I think there's something to be said in those examples.
Yeah, and even if you're someone who's like maybe very scared to like jump like full-fledged into testing or something like that, or full-fledged into Angular or becoming like a full-time programmer, testing, like automated testing is a really good place to start because like it's, in my opinion, it's much easier to write a Cypress test than it is to like, write like learn how to write a full Angular application or something like that. So it could be a really good, I find testing could be a really good gateway into becoming a full-time programmer. And I've seen it in
Right?
so many instances as well. So I think it works on both sides of the table. It can be something that grows your career if you're already a developer, and it could be something that sort of gets you in the door to becoming a developer.
Yeah, definitely. All right, I have two questions left here just to wrap things up, but I'm curious if there were, and I know you've mentioned a couple already. You mentioned like the tree frog,
Or
or treehouse,
treehouse, or
yeah,
yeah, I
whatever it
forget.
was. But were there any other resources now or earlier on while you were learning Angular that you felt like were really helpful for you?
Yeah. It's really hard to pin it down to one thing. I mentioned NG-Conf. I found like conferences were a really good place. Most of them have workshops that are a really good place to learn kind of a start to finish. Not that you're going to learn everything; it's going to go really fast, but kind of give you the start to finish of how to write something like an Angular or something. I think that those are really valuable.
Yeah.
Um, I would say Pluralsight has been a site that I've used quite a bit that has helped me along the way. And I've mentioned like just reaching out to people and like asking them to be my mentor has been, really valuable. And also just, I would just say like, even just like staying up with technology on Twitter, as kind of trivial as that seems, but it's like just
Mhm.
knowing what are other people building, what are people
Yeah.
talking about, just so you're aware. Like even if you don't understand it, just be aware of what's happening in the industry. And I think that that's for me have been successful, things I can look back and point to.
Yeah. That's been one of the biggest benefits, I think, for me being involved in NG-Conf is just knowing the different companies that are around and what the
Sure.
buzzwords are. And yeah, so I totally agree with that. Then, all right, last question is, now that you've learned Angular, you're better at it. I mean, we've already said there's always going to be more to learn.
Sure.
But at the point you are today, if you could go back and teach your earlier Angular self, what are things that you wish you had known back then that you think would have made your learning path easier?
Oh man. Um, I would say for me personally, I was actually just talking to my wife about this. I, as more of like a life philosophy, am not a believer in regrets, to be honest with you. I feel like we are who we are because of our experiences.
Yeah.
So in general, I don't think I would tell myself anything different. I mean, because I feel like the times where I, you know, spent way too much time fixing a problem that was really
Mhm.
obvious, those were good learning experiences because it taught me like, oh, sometimes it's good just to go to bed and wake up the next day with the clear mind. Or, oh, next time I'm definitely not going to forget to check this, if I
Right.
run into an issue, because so those are really good. But if I guess I just had to like talk in general, I would just say, I would just tell myself like it's worth it. Like keep working hard. Focus on something. It could be very overwhelming to like become, even like that I'm a GD. It's kind of surreal because if I look back, like I don't know if I ever would have said I would have considered myself an expert. And I don't know if I don't even like that word now,
Right.
but I would say, just looking back, I would just say, don't become overwhelmed by all the things. Just focus on something today. And, every single day, if we get 1% better, we learn something new every single day. That begins to compound, and it has this really big, like, I don't know, just compounding effect in our learning journey. And then the other thing I would say is, I would say, I had this book that I read in college, and I'll never forget what it said, but it mentioned basically the thought was, the day you stop teaching is the day you stop learning. And it's like, the best way to learn something for me is to commit to teaching it, because once I have to teach it, I have to really learn all the parts of it.
Right.
So I would say,
Mhm.
like, once you're beyond, you know, or I would say, even if you're like new to programming, like commit to teaching it to, a sibling, your mom or dad, like a spouse, like commit to trying to teach whatever it is, to someone, because in the process of teaching, you become a better learner, and and it just helps your overall education. So I wish I maybe would have started doing some of those things a little earlier, in my career, but I would say in general, I don't really believe in regrets. I think that, we are where we are because of the
Yeah.
experiences we have. So
Yeah. No, I think there's wisdom in that. So, and I couldn't agree more because, well, coming from an education background, I know exactly what that feels like, where when you have to go teach, it's actually kind of funny that honestly, truly, like one of the most difficult classes I ever took in college was an math for elementary teachers class.
hmm.
And I went into it thinking, oh my gosh, this is stupid. Like, what am I really going to get
Mm-hmm.
out of this? And yet the teacher made us break down some of the most simple math that you kind of take for granted over the years. Your teacher when you're a kid teaches you these processes and you just learn through rote memorization how to go through the steps, but do you ever really understand why
Mm-hmm.
and what is going on? And the answer is that I don't think most people do. And so when you become a teacher and you have to really dive into the hows and the whys,
Mm-hmm.
your understanding just totally deepens. So I completely agree with that. And one thing I love, as I was doing the Dev Life podcast, was different Angular developers or developers in general would suggest just blog about it. Maybe your
Mm-hmm.
mom doesn't care to hear, or your spouse or your kids don't care to hear what you have to say, but your blog does. And you can always type things up, even if nobody
Mm-hmm.
else looks at it. At least you always have that reference point of, I remember when I was learning about that, and I know where to find it in my own notes. So I think
Totally.
that's
There's
smart too.
countless times where I've written blogs, and I knew probably no one was going to read this, but to this day, I forget how to do it. And I go back and read my own blog article on how
Right?
to
Right?
publish an Angular library or whatever the thing is, right? So
Yeah.
I think, yeah, sometimes we can get fixated on, well, it's not going to, like, I'm not the best teacher, or I'm not going to be, not that many people are going to see it or care about it, but it's not really, it's not necessarily about that. It's just like the process of, like, even just flexing that muscle,
Yeah.
that muscle of teaching. Like, it's a really great thing. And like you said, like, we memorize that 1+1 is 2, but like, do we really, like, if you had to explain it to a kid or like a child, how would you explain what's 1+1? Like, that's a much different ask than just saying what's 1+1. Like,
Right.
that's, it's a different like part of your brain. And I think that oftentimes, you know understanding the why in programming, I think, is really, really valuable. And yeah.
Agreed. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I think this was, I write the scripts before we come on here, and you kind of lay out like what you want in the episode, but definitely we went down some like ideas and concepts that I wasn't expecting, and I love it. I love that this was about you, and I think a lot of people are going to relate to a lot of the things that you shared. So thank you so much. And I do want to circle back though onto how can people contribute to like either the Christmas funds or even helping out with Dream On Global in general. Where can they get information on that?
Sure. So you can visit our website at dreamon.world. You can give directly on there. Or we also have, you can also reach out to me directly on Twitter, or like Instagram, Facebook. My handle's at JordanPowell88. Be happy to answer questions you might have. We are a 501c3. I can get you tax receipts and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, everything we do is because of people, that believe in what we're doing and contribute to it. It's something that, my wife and I, and, we contribute to personally, but, the scope of the things we do couldn't be done without the, all the people that help. So
Yeah,
it's definitely appreciate anyone who's, would feel led to help and be a part of it. So
I love that. I love that example of just finding that balance and knowing that there's something in there about serving other people and helping other people and thinking outside of yourself. So thank you for that example. But yeah, everybody, you heard it. If you want to connect with Jordan, he's on Twitter at JordanPowell88. And again, thank you so much. And I know you have lots of things that you're putting out, so we'll look forward to more talks. And thanks again.
absolutely. Thanks for having me, Brooke.